Well, in April of '33, I decided to leave the Soviet Union because, although they wanted me to stay and continue with my work, Hitler had already taken over in Germany, and it was terrifying for the Russians, and the Germans had been given notice, didn't matter whether they were communists or non-communist, that they had 1 month to decide whether they'd become Soviet citizens or go home. And there were 10,000 of them in Leningrad alone. But you see, they were very heavily dependent upon German technicians. And I didn't just run right away because I thought it was discourteous, let's put it that way. But I didn't want to stay any longer than I had to. And I had also had another experience, two experiences. The GPU had somebody watching me all along and said so, and they in fact invited me to their home, and the chap who invited me to his home was an old, if you like, soldier of the Béla Kun Revolution, Hungarian who was homesick for Budapest, and he used to invite me once a month to see if there was anything, you know, that was going wrong in my thing, and to make sure that I was still not involved directly in any plots or counterplots or anything else, so far as the evidence was. But on one occasion, there were two other guys there from, obviously, the secret GPU, who demanded that I write my, if you like, confession. Who had sent me, who from Scotland Yard had sent me, and who were my contacts in the Soviet Union, and why had I come in the first place? Well, for me, and don't tell anybody of this meeting, because this is a very big country and you could easily get lost. Okay, that was the psychological, as far as I was concerned, that was the end of the fun. And that, the whole thing changed as far as I was concerned when I was under that kind of pressure. And I brought in my confession, as it were, my autobiography, which was 4 or 5 pages, in Russian. I could write Russian by then. And I had been taught by a Polish lady who hated Russians, and the head of our lab was a Pole who also hated Russians. So, you know, there wasn't the question of ideology in the factory there. The upshot of this was that I simply took my time and decided to leave the Soviet Union with this a friend of mine who had been was a communist from Berlin, who was about the same age as I was, and we used to go to parties together and so on, and I was fond of him. He was a devil-may-care Berliner, full of wit and humor, and his communism was because his father and mother were communists, you know, that kind. Well, okay, we decided to leave in April, because we went to the GPU and said, now look, they said, well, won't you stay, to me, and not to him. Won't you stay? And I said, and finish your education here. I still had a year to go. And I said, well, I thanked them for their courtesy, and they had the top management delegation asked me to finish my education there and come on and be one of the members of their engineering staff. And I said, well, I appreciated the courtesy and so on, but I wanted to go back home and finish it. Okay, so no problem, and I just said that I'd like to be able to buy my ticket in rubles. I went, oh yeah, that's all right. So to Berlin, where I had some money being sent from through my uncle in St. Stephen's, Shepherd's Bush, Ryerson, Edgerton Ryerson, and I went with this friend of mine on the train back across the Polish corridor and so on, scared to death, really, both of us were, that what would happen to us when we crossed the German border. Well, nothing happened to us, because there was just the regular German border control Beamte, and beside him one of these new Nazis with his swastika on, Heil Hitler, as you went across, and that was no more said. And when I got to Berlin, my money, which had been sent to the Postlager and to Postrestant in the post office, had been sent back to England. There I was in Berlin without any money. So they invited me to stay in their home in Karl Marxhof, where I spent about 3 days while I had £5 in my shoe in a check, which I'd given to the English consul in Leningrad. So I had to find £5 to get along with until my money came. And I lived in the, at that time, whenever I was in Berlin, I lived in the Christlichen Hospiz, that is the Christian hostel, right beside the headquarters of the NSDAP, the National Socialist Party, across the street on Friedrichstrasse from the Foreign Affairs, the Reichskanzlei, okay? That's where it was, and where the Berlin Wall had gone through, all right? Well, all right, I left Berlin just at this time. It was obvious the Jews were being beaten up. You know, you could see some of these old boys going around with bandages on them already. And I thought, no, I'll get the hell out of here. Down to Vienna, where my sister was, and she'd been playing bit parts in the Hofburg, and had been staying with these friends that, of this girlfriend of mine who married my brother, by the way. He'd gone to live with them. He'd been a student at the University of Vienna. And then I moved down from there down to Italy to study Italian for 4 months down in Florence, in Firenze. And I had a very interesting time there, but it wasn't anything like the student life of Germany or anywhere else. It was very, in a way, lonely, and I lived right near the Il Duomo on the Via dei Servi with 2 old ladies who were just so happy to have me. I hated to leave them because it was the only money they had to buy meat with, was what I gave them. All right, so then I went from there to the University of Santander in Spain, the summer university for European teachers of Spanish. Now, I spoke pretty good Italian after 4 months because I'd studied it carefully. And I went to the Universidad del Verano de Santander in Spain, first of all to sign up with Harold Lasky, who was teaching a course in international law, and then for the courses given to European teachers of Spanish language. And I studied my Spanish in between times, and from the Hugo's grammar onward, the Hugo's was my old standby. And from the third secretary of the Japanese embassy in Madrid, who was spending his vacation down there and spoke beautiful Spanish and very little English. Okay, we were friends, and had every day practice in Spanish together. And I graduated from there, you know, no problem, with as it were, a crash course of some 6 weeks. And went back to London, and then back to Canada to take my last year in engineering with no money left. So I paid my fees and then had nothing, and took a job for the German firm of that was setting up to sell surgical instruments and chemical glassware here in Toronto as their first salesman, and went around with Johnny Andros and got through my 4th year in university. And in my 4th year, in Toronto University, as you know, you don't have to attend lectures, but you do have to attend labs. I did all my labs and skipped all my lectures except a couple, and went out as a salesman and made enough money to live on, and graduated. I didn't graduate because the faculty said, now look, Barry, you can get away with this once, but we can't let you graduate without one failure. What course do you want to fail on? I'd passed everything. What course do you want to fail on? Because we have to, you either have to take us up or we'll give you your degree in 6 years. I said, okay, I'll take my degree in 6 years, although I may come back and take one course over again, just, you know, electrical machinery and measurements, which I didn't like particularly, but I could, you know, have done this. But no, as soon as my 4th year was finished, I had 4 job offers. And to go back to the Air Force with the Roy Maxwell, he wanted me back again to be captain of one of the ships, which offered in those days a tremendous salary of $400 a month, you know, plus $2 an hour flying time, which was, you know, for those days, which was still depression, was a fortune for the summer flying. And I said no. I didn't. I realized it was a dead end. You know, it was very attractive, but it was a dead end. I was offered a job to set up the Canadian National Carbon Company's sales operation here, which was at that time was radio station CKNC. I was offered 2 or 3 other jobs, but Northern Electric Company came along and offered me a year's training down at the plant in Montreal as what they then called manufacturing engineer, or an industrial engineer as we now call it. And I wanted to go to Montreal, and it was the lowest salary offered. I went down to Montreal happily and gladly and joined Northern Electric Company and worked with them for the next 5 years as a manufacturing engineer at the Shear Street plant, and got the training, as you like, of an industrial engineer. In those days they called them scientific managers. The whole business of scientific management as it was then being taught and practiced. And I found that wonderful. I was heavily involved in several things. First of all, I wanted to get into international business. I'd been training for that all along, and I did two things. I went to McGill and tried to get started with a night course organization for a postgraduate degree there, and Fred Howes, who was professor of electrical engineering, was interested, but it wasn't possible. This came later, until after the war broke out. Now, after 5 years at Northern, in 1939, I wanted to see what was happening in Europe again, so I took leave of absence. Like, you talk about somebody that was absolutely mad. I took leave of absence, having had 2 children, and wanted to get into international business, and knowing that it was a question of whether there would be war in Europe or not, and that Danzig was the key. So what I did was I got 4 months leave of absence from Northern. Went over. I was in Paris on the 14th of July. I went over on this French road. I was in Paris 14th of July, and I went round through the whole of Europe, including Germany, at that time, to see what was going on. And one of the things that I was interested in was studying the situation with regard to the formation of trade unions for technical workers and engineers in Europe, what they did, because I thought something should be done like that in Canada. Well, I was already red-listed once for having been in the Soviet Union. Now I got into trouble again for getting interested in a union for engineers and technicians. Okay. We leave that as a background because it will influence my further development. And when I went to Europe then in '39, it was in July, and I went through Germany, went back and looked up my old friend who had come across the border. I'd found him, and I found out his history, and I found out also that the German engineers that had been our friends over there, one of the wild men that we'd known who picked up all the girls he could on his motorcycle in Leningrad, was one of the leading members of the NSDAP, the Nazi party. Okay, so off we went, and I did find out what had happened to him, and he was anxious to find out what was happening outside. He had been nailed right off. One of the people that had been over there had spotted all the communists and pointed them out, and the ones that had been technical people were just said, okay, you go into, they gave them a place they could live with a Nazi between each one of them, and they were told, kein Mucks machen, keep your mouth shut and work and you won't stay out of trouble, that's all. So he said that's what it was up to, and the question was what was going on. Would Hitler be foolish enough to start a war? I said, well, this is what we all want to know. So I'm here to see what I can see, and the last of it, and I won't go into the details because this is a story in itself. But what I did do is I touched base for the first time in Holland, and was taken around by the trade union people there who had a very good organization for engineers and technicians. And they took me up right away and drove me around Holland to their mountains, and their valley. Their mountains were 200 meters high, I think, in Holland. And I got a wonderful introduction to Holland. And then I went up to Norway and to Sweden, and I picked up a wonderful Swedish girlfriend who took me out to the islands there, and I went from there over to the Soviet Union again for a week to find out what's going on there. And nobody except the Vilovitsky family, who were doctors, would talk to me, except the children. And my Russian was still pretty good, and I went around and spent my time there just, talking to the kids and to whoever else would talk to me about, but they wouldn't allow me back into the factory where I had worked before. So let's put that behind us and say that it was a fascinating visit, but it was dangerous, and I had my eyes still watching Danzig, and I decided to go back as fast as I could. This was already in August to England, and I got back to England to find out that I couldn't get on board the ship that I had intended to come back on, which was the Athenia. I don't think you will remember the Athenia. But I couldn't get on board the Athenia, and this was the end of August. So I went over, and I got a passage on a tramp steamer out of Rotterdam, a Norwegian tramp steamer, that was carrying Scotch whiskey, Geneva gin and champagne to Montreal. 1,400 tons, and they allowed me to sleep in the hospital. And the captain wanted a drinking companion to drink the breakages. Well, I've never had so many hangovers in my life. But anyway, by the time we taken it away, and he was a while I earned my way. By the time we got to the south of Ireland, war had been declared, and the Athenia was sunk at the north of Ireland. It was the first casualty in shipping in the First World War, and many of the people on board were lost. So I had the good luck of missing that. And we went over as Norwegians with all lights burning and all the rest. The other thing I was afraid of was maybe the submarines might be boarding ships that were entering the St. Lawrence. But no, we came into St. John's, Newfoundland, and up to Montreal, and it was 14 days. So there it was. I was home again, and fired without, from Northern. They'd had orders to, that was it. I'd been to Germany and I'd been to the Soviet Union, and that was enough. So I had a little difficulty there for a while. However, I went up to Ottawa, and I finally found who to talk to in the RCMP, and they were very decent about it all. And they said, look, you've been keeping very bad company. Now why don't you tell us what you're up to? I said, you ask me about myself, and the answer is yes. You ask me about anybody else, and the answer is no. No. He said, well, that's all right. So having, shall I say, nothing to hide as far as my own particular conduct was concerned, and having been marked again with the red mark by my cousin, Stanley Ryerson, who was, after all, head of the Communist Party of Quebec, a doctor of Romance languages from the Sorbonne, and teaching at Sir George Williams College. And for that matter, nothing secret about him. He was right in the open. He'd been a member all the way through. He'd been a scholarship student from Upper Canada College, and his father was dean of the Faculty of Medicine here at Toronto University, Stanley Ryerson. Okay. Now, he was the only communist I knew for sure was a communist, and I didn't give a damn about the rest. I used to go around and hear Dr. Bethune talk, and and all the rest of them. I didn't care who my companions were. They said, you've been keeping pretty bad company. I said, what do you mean bad company? I don't see anything the matter with these guys. As far as I'm concerned, they're all right. And he said, well, look, you just stay away from that. From the time being during the war, he said, we don't trust these people. And we think they may be, helping the Germans and so on with the Nazi Russian pact and all that. So I said, well, okay, that's fair enough. And I started right into work with the Canadian Pacific Telegraphs. And I was put in charge gradually of the whole inside plant extension for the multi-channel systems across Canada. And this was a tremendous expansion which I organized in a way where we were able to do the work of 10 times the expansion we'd had before with only a couple of people additional on the staff. So I got, in a sense, the opportunity to show how to organize an internal engineering activity that had been done by a whole staff of people before, which could now be done much faster and better by a few. That's the introduction of some management techniques and so on, which I had learned in the Bill system. All right, now we go on from there, and at that time I was also heavily involved in setting up this school for engineers at McGill. And I took my degree at night, I was in charge of getting the engineers to join this thing, and 15 were all we needed. I got 45, and I was the first one to graduate. So I got my master's degree at night from McGill, and I was teaching at Sir George Williams the History and Philosophy of Science, which was the first course given in the History and Philosophy of Science in Canada. And just about the time that Stanley Ryerson was fired, I was hired, okay, in the faculty there for teaching that subject. And in the process of, shall I say, getting my degree at McGill, I got to know Ed Laporte, whose father had been from Eastern Canada, and who was chief of the RCA engineering establishment in Montreal. And he asked me if I'd join him as his assistant in setting up the RCA International Division after the war. And I said I'd be delighted. It's the thing I've been looking for all along. And he said, well, if you do that, then he said, I think you should have a year before. And do you mind if we applied to the government to get you into a development of the transatlantic, trans-Pacific radio teletype system? And I said, ideal, fine. So they seconded me to the United States Navy for the development of frequency shift telegraph receiving and transmitting for the long-distance communication of the United States Armed Forces, okay? And we won out RCA with the design that we had against IT&T, and this Yankee know-how on our side was run by Canadians, and the Yankee know-how on the other side was run by Australians, and we won by a whisker, okay? And after the war, well, I was moved in, shuttled. I was moving between Montreal and Camden, New Jersey. So, and I was allowed to spend 29 days in the States. I had to come back to Canada every 30th day to conform to their laws. And I'd married in the meantime, I'd had a divorce in '41, I'd married in the meantime a wonderful Western girl who was my pal from then on. She was a secretary for Dr. Jasper at the Montreal Neurological Institute and was swing secretary for Dr. Penfield. So, and she was studying medicine at Sir George Williams, free med at night. So we had, let's say, another life started. Well, to make that story short, I spent, after the war, I spent 3 years as assistant chief engineer of RCA's International Division in New York, setting up the spin-off of all the technology of military technology into the channels that they had, but along product lines, which was the only way they think, and trying to get that established for the international, if you like, telecommunications services, which required systems design. And the systems design was lacking in that they didn't have everything necessary to make up a system. And the LM Ericsson company of Stockholm came to RCA after seeing how I had been working in Latin America and Europe and elsewhere. They'd been watching to see how RCA was coming out and asked if they could have me without making enemies of themselves, that they wanted me to be the bridge between the new technology of microwave, which I had been heavily involved in, and in these things which were coming along that they didn't know about, and take on a job as a senior consultant for them, which I did for the next 15 years. So that meant I worked in New York for 5 years. I moved down to Caracas, Venezuela, where we got the contract for doing all of the long-distance systems down there, all of the long-distance systems in Colombia, down into Brazil, into Argentina, and Ericsson was well established in Peru and in Argentina and many of these other Latin American countries where they in fact were the leading people in telecommunications. And I was then, in a sense, put in charge of all of the developments on the technological and on the commercial side to fight IT&T and Siemens and the Automatic Electric of Chicago and of Great Britain. And we won 80% of the business. And this was my love and my fun and all the rest of it. And I, as I say, wrote a contract which allowed me to travel with my wife first class anywhere. I lived on an expense account and deposited what was left in the in New York, and had a couple of kids here that I had to send to school here. I took them with me in Caracas, Venezuela, and then had to leave them here because I couldn't take them down to Brazil. Okay. Now, that then meant that I was involved in both the business and the financing and in the technological side of telecommunications worldwide. I'd be in Stockholm 4 times a year, and in New York, often in Canada and all the rest of it, set the company up here and so on. Gave me the practical multinational experience. Well, at the end of the biggest contract that I'd engineered, which was for Brasilia, connecting Brasilia up, the new capital in Brazil, with all the other capitals of Brazil and with the other capitals of the world, as it were, using the latest technology, as well as combining it with the competitive stuff that was there, so that Ericsson wouldn't get the whole thing. My wife decided for me that it was long enough for me to spend. I was already over 50 in 1960, okay? It was long enough for me to spend down there when we saw what would happen to anyone who would be on an assignment of this kind after 65. You'd have your money, no friends, and nowhere to go but where you last lived, okay? And we saw the results of this, and we didn't like it. So she said, let's go home and just be ourselves. So I let my contract lapse with Ericsson, which was a very hard thing to do, and came home. I had 9 months accumulated holidays, which I hadn't used, due to me. And I came up here and went to the University of Western Ontario to take their crash course in the what they call a crash MBA for senior executives, and I was the only guy that paid for my own. And I got my money's worth, okay, just to find out what was happening in Canada, in the business world. And I'd also, to have another iron in the fire, I worked in helping to set up a consulting firm in New Jersey with a friend of mine who had been a dropout from RCA as chief engineer, who wanted to set up his own establishment. I worked with him for nothing for a year while I was doing some of these other things, exploring, and I was taken on in the meantime as a consultant by Grant Glasgow on the Royal Commission of Government Organization to present the first report that was included in that, which was Communication in Government and Government in Communication. I could do it so easily that I only had 3 months to do it in, for me, because I wasn't cleared for the military part. I'd left that deliberately out because I didn't want to get involved in the American military things, and I'd stayed deliberately out of it because otherwise it might have put a crimp on my traveling, okay? And I then went out, and I was hired by Stevenson Kellogg, whom I knew quite well, as a consultant for a leftover of a budget of operations research that had to be kept confidential, but because it was being used in a way that nobody really knew whether it was worth doing or not, was that what satellite should Canada invest in and what should their system be. And I proposed the synchronous satellite, and that Hughes be allowed to do that, and the ground stations, which we should do in Canada through Northern Electric, who had the technology. And 10 years later, why it was done when the competitive edge had already been lost, if you like. So I was in on that. And Northern Electric Company invited me to come back. My old chief there, Cy Peachy, asked me if I'd come back to set up their international division, which I did in 6 months. And I did so with the understanding that I wouldn't have to spill the beans on any people, but only on the process of doing it and what the booby traps were and how to do it. And then he said, okay, now you take charge. And I said, but Cy, I wouldn't take charge of this unless I could get a better contract than I had with Ericsson. But he said, you can't get a contract from Northern. I said, well, that's it, Cy. I came back home to be at home, and I'm very glad anytime I can be of help to you. So from time to time, I touch base with Northern and helped them. But and then soon after that, the Ontario Development Corporation, which was at that time, the Ontario Development Agency, was set up here in the Treasury Building by Macaulay, who was then minister. And Macaulay had on his staff a chap by the name of Etchem, who was now and still is a friend, who said to me when this thing was given to him to set up, I have no budget, I have no authority, I can't say what the outcome of this will be, but if you're interested, your experience would be very useful to us, and if you like us and we like you, stay. And for the next 15 years I stayed. Now that was where it became a Crown Corporation, and that was the Ontario Development Corporation. I was put in charge of everything that nobody else wanted to do, and one of the main things was I was director of management training for entrepreneurs and on dealing with the technological assessment of all projects involving new invention, new technology, and so on, and of helping the general director write the programs for the upcoming ministries. Every year had to be something sweeter and nicer that could be done in government. All right, so much for that. But that was across the street from the Centre for Culture and Technology, and that wasn't yet across the street from the Centre for Culture and Technology. But in 1964, I decided, after having said no to Northern, that the only reason I wanted to stay in Canada really was Marshall McLuhan. I'd met him after meeting the American Association of Advancement of Science, which I had been very close to on the General Systems people. I had realized that, well, they were to dead end, and my wife had given me for my 1964 Christmas present, Understanding Media, and I'd asked her if I could read it as soon as I got it, which was sometime in October, I think. And I read it, and I thought, my God, that guy's right on to the, if you like, the approach that I've been working on in science and the history and philosophy of science, except that he's pointed out in his explorations some of the things that I had missed. I've got to get him, I've got to meet him. So I just called him up on the phone and he said, well, look, why don't you come down on Monday night in this college, which was in the observatory on at that time on campus. And I never looked back. For the next 15 years, I was with Marshall, except for the year that he spent out in the States, and I went to visit him down there, and we began to work together on almost everything he did. A couple of times a week, I'd either be at his home or on the telephone or down at the seminars, be working with him. And when he came back from the States, from the assignment down at Fordham, he asked me if I would be willing to take today with him. Or it was called then the Executive's Dropout. Well, I didn't particularly like the title, and I thought there should be more to it, and I told him so, but we left that to the end. We spent the next 4 years writing that for ourselves. And we had an absolutely marvelous time until Corinne got fed up with not having the book. And she said, you guys have been having too good a time. It's time you wrote the book. And Marshall said, well, give all of the essays to the editor. And I said, Marshall, nobody will understand this book except ourselves. So I'll take it on. And I spent the next year putting it together with an editor from Harcourt, Brace Jovanovich, and she's a wonderful girl. And we got that out. And Marshall was very disappointed that there wasn't a blockbuster, but let's put it this way, it was way ahead of its time. And it was so obviously written for our own pleasure and our own understanding and our own, that I would say it's just getting to the stage now where people could understand it. Well, to go into that, let's talk about what it is that we learned in writing it. And one of the things we learned in writing it was that Marshall hadn't really thoroughly understood what the technological model for communication was, which was the Shannon-Weaver model, which I had used as an engineer and had known Shannon in the Bell Labs because I had been liaison for Ericsson with Bell Labs, and I knew most of these people who were involved in the new technologies. And this was one of the things that is the Shannon approach to matching outputs to inputs with given telecommunication facilities that was extremely important for us. And so I pointed out to him that this had become, as it were, an all-embracing model for all communication in all the schools of the world. And that indeed no other model existed so far as the universities are concerned. The assumption being that if you match the output of a circuit to the input, then you could match the one human mind with whatever it was and another human mind, and that would be perfect communication. And the problem that Marshall immediately spotted was the word matching. That in human communication you never match anything, you remake the experience. And that the way he always started, and this is what struck me immediately because I had never started this way myself, is what is the sensory experience of the communication process? What happens to the people involved in it, in their sensory lives? Well, as soon as you ask that question, it opens up a whole new way of examining what goes on. And in Writing Take Today, we spotted it in this way, we formulated it this way. He'd come up with the medium as a message, as a way of drawing attention. It was an exaggeration, a rhetorical hyperbole, that drew attention to the power of the medium to transform your intention into whatever was the result was the message. And if you think of the message as the result, as the totality of the effects, then you are beginning to come to grips with what human communication is about. And that is, we then reformulated it based upon long discussions, but also upon our experience with Baudelaire. Hypocrite lecteur, mon semblable, mon frère, had been long known as the hypocrite, was the actor, Greek actor. Lecteur, reader, my likeness, mon semblable, mon frère, my brother. Let us put on this poem and shred it together and make sense of it. All right. Now that process of making sense then was putting on the media, the program in the medium, and making sense of that relationship between whatever it was on the medium and yourself. That was the sense. So to simplify this in language, and the process that we began to spot was the intention, which is internal. The medium, the choice you make of bringing that intention out, what medium you're using, and how you program it to share the experience, that is, with the language of that medium, the language of that medium. Now, what was the meaning? The meaning was the sense you made of it, and each person made different sense of it, depending upon what that person brought to it. And what was the message? The totality of the effects, regardless of the intention. But the important thing was, what was the content? Well, for the technological process, the content was the program. That is, matching the input program and the output program. This was matching the content, the signals, the dots that you sent, and the dashes, or the spaces and the marks, or whatever scheme you used to match them, input to output, output to input rather. Now, the content of all human communication is the people, not the program. So that they put on the medium, which is programmed in a certain way by someone who wishes to reinforce through that medium the experience, which is the totality of the effects. And the meaning for each person will be different, and they'll never match. Nobody will ever have the same experience as anybody else. Why? Well, because percepts, which are a direct encounter with human experience as it is, our direct encounter with this world as it is, in human terms, with human experience as it is individual. And it's never repeated. Never repeated. What is repeated is a similarity. That is, human beings who are brought up in a similar context have similar experience in similar contexts with similar programming. But they're never identical. And it is to understand where these vary that you need a language which tells you what to look out for. And the language is the language of the Gestalt psychologists, which we then began to develop. In the previous writing of Marshall, it was, he was drawing attention to environment, counter-environment. He was looking at the environment, which is the media. The medium is an environment. It's something that you put on. And the counter-environment is something you invent to, if you like, to expose it. But that terminology, while it's useful, isn't, shall I say, as sharp in revealing the situation as the figured ground terminology, which simply says that anything that you select to study is a figure. Anything. And everything else is ground. And you can't possibly experience everything else. You can experience part of it. And then if you try to share that with someone else, you try to describe it in terms of some medium, or share it in terms of some medium. It is not the experience that you're sharing, it's a description of the experience. And the same thing occurs with the figure. The figure that you take out to study is a description when it's shared with somebody else. It is not what that experience was, but it is the way you try to share that in some language with somebody else. Well, as soon as you begin to look at human communication that way, then you know, well, first of all, that nothing has any meaning alone, but only in its relationship to a ground which tends to remain hidden. It is the ground of your culture, it's the ground of the world in which you live and which you may or may not be aware of. But nevertheless, that is what makes sense or meaning for each person. And the same thing with the message. Nobody can foretell what the message will actually be. But as an artist with experience of human communication, you can anticipate the effect of human communication by asking the question, all right, what will its physical effects be? What will its psychological effects be? What will its social effects be, insofar as I can foresee them? In sharing this with somebody else, I can find a whole range of things which I myself won't know, but somebody else may experience. And together, we begin to get, by making an inventory of these effects, we begin to make them manifest. And because a manifest is, after all, an inventory. And it is this inventory of effects which is how we come to understand anything in human terms. Not through an argument between let us assume this is so and then find out what the consequence of this assumption is, which is the way we must proceed with conceptual analysis. But in the opposite direction. We have a certain experience that we know is unique and that we would like to share with someone else by some means that we can discover that will bring them to an understanding such as we have. This is human communication, and as Marshall once said to me, it's a miracle, Barry. It's not quite impossible, but it very seldom happens. So that to communicate anything new requires an enormous, if you like, extension of our effort to manifest what this new experience is in terms which you can share with other people. This is the nature of human communication, and the poets are aware of it. For that matter, the musicians and the painters, to some extent, more than some of them are more articulate about it and are more conscious about it than others. But this is the process. So that in art, then, you start with the desired effects and you create the causes which are give you those effects insofar as you're able to understand the process. In science, on the other hand, you start with presumed causes and you look for effects that will contradict this. And then you go back to the drawing board with another theory. So that when Marshall said he has no theories, he simply was saying, I don't start with the presumption that I have found the causes, but only with the use of this term cause as a probe to explore what other things are at work. And by doing this, we can then get a grasp on what is manifest. As any fool can plainly see, I can see it, says little Alfred. Okay? Now, that doesn't require technical dexterity. It requires human perception. Now, perception is, as St. Thomas Aquinas understood, a relation among relations, apprehended, grasped in our sensory lives. And it's constantly changing. It's not fixed. And so that we get in then to this whole range of human understanding in terms of perceptual rather than conceptual terms, without rejecting the concepts, but simply putting them on the, shall I say, on hold, and saying that percept precedes concept. And concepts are simply packages of similar percepts brought together for convenient use, and can often be very inconvenient unless you look behind them. Now, the next stage in this whole process is to recognize the difference between the nature that man created and the nature which he, in fact, is an extension of. So we are the extensions of the nature that, if you like, God made, if you think in terms of divinity. The nature which we inherited, the nature of which we are an extension, we all share with every living being, and non-living being too. And the question of how we understand that is what it manifests to us. Okay? That's how we understand it. The question of the nature that we make, which is all of our artifacts, whether they're hardware or software, whether they're systems of management or philosophy or logic or mathematics, or they are articles such as pens or pencils or apples or oranges, whatever we grow or whatever we have created by our own efforts, are in fact, by their very existence, demonstrably communication media, because we can ask ourselves the question, what is it, first of all, what is it that they do in the environment, physically, psychologically, and socially? That's the first question we can ask. And we can ask a question which we later discovered to be equally important, is the not thinking in terms of merely either or logic, is it this or is it that, but in the Heraclitean sense of it is both this and that at the same time. In the logic, if you like, of what we call acoustic space, that is a space which cannot be divided, which has centers everywhere and boundaries nowhere. The space that the pre-literate man lived in, and for that matter, the post-literate man, and indeed the space of nature before we package it. That is the nature of which we ourselves are an extension. That is acoustic space. But in structure, it is like the space that the ear operates in, or the oral tactile space. And the visual space is simply that which the eye sees, the space in which the eye operates, where no two things can be in the same place at the same time, and every thing has its private point of view, its center wherever you are, and its boundaries wherever they are, its horizons or limits. All right. Now, these ideas of visual and acoustic space are fundamental, because with them go the logic of structure that means altogether, all at once, to the Heraclitean, if you like, sense of both and. Everything is both something and something else at the same time. And the Aristotelian space, which says that a thing cannot both be and not be something at the same time. It must be either this or that, that is categorically, which is only possible in, shall I say, man-made thinking. It is an artifact of the way we think logically in our Western world, and this arose as a result, as Marshall certainly pointed out, and was not the first to do so, there are many others, that it arose as a result of the Greek phonetic alphabet, which demanded from the students that they learn to make sense of the phonemes, the sounds of the Greek characters, which had no visual or acoustic semantic meaning. And once they went through that process, then they began to think not only logically of how to construct a language and a literature out of that, but also sequentially, and began to, in other words, think in logical sequential terms. Now, this was Western civilization. This is what the Greeks founded. It doesn't exist in any other culture to that degree, although it does exist in a lesser, or shall I say, other degree. And you can do this by studying the cultures and the effects of their modes of writing and communication upon their modes of thinking. That we can deal with. Eric Havelock has dealt with it extremely well, and we don't need to embark on it now. The thing that we need to embark on is the next stage, and this is the one I'd like to open up for our future discussion among all of us in this world. And that is that every human artifact, everything made by man, woman, or child, is something that serves and acts as a communication medium. And its power as a communication medium can be studied by asking four basic questions, which is, what does it enhance or accelerate or magnify? What does it obsolesce? What does it erode or wipe out? And what does it retrieve of similar nature? Similar. Previously, if you like, obsolesced or put on the back burner, as it were, and is now being revived with a new meaning in the new context. Notice, a new meaning because there's a new context since it was last obsolete. And we also know that what does it become when you push it to extreme? Now, there are two ways of asking this question. One is the way of the rhetorician, and the other is the logician. The rhetorician asks very simply that whatever you push to extreme reverses in language and in behavior, in human behavior. You can ask it in the Hegelian sense of the transformation of quantity into quality and vice versa, quality into quantity. This is in the Hegelian categories. You get these reversals or transformations occurring in nature also, and it's easy enough to see that if you raise the temperature of ice, you get water, and of water, you get steam, and so on. You get these transformations occurring in nature, which you must expect if you take anything, either in nature or any artifact made by man, and change its context, then you will change its behavior. And this is so obvious that it seems hardly necessary to state it, but there it is. So if you use this kind of questioning, you begin to get a manifest, okay, in either the first one, which is the physical, psychological, and social effects, and you can put that in on the four basic questions and say, let's make a manifest for each one of these questions, which is, what does it enhance, what does it magnify, what does it obsolesce, what does it erode, what does it retrieve of similar nature, and you can make a manifest of each of these, and what does it flip into or reverse into or become if you push it to extreme. You can make a manifest of that too. And you can make it through our entire human experience, and in so doing, gain the kind of experience that is what you might call an understanding that goes far beyond the questions that are being asked by mathematicians and philosophers and people who are trying to define the nature of those things which make life worth living. And my contention is that nothing that makes life worth living can be defined. It can only be experienced. It is perceptual, not conceptual. And I would go further and say, and this is the nature of intelligence, which is forever beyond the 2-bit width of the computer, and those who advocate artificial intelligence as, shall I say, the outcome of our culture and its future. And I would go further and add this, that we must be able to understand how it works on the one hand, and on the other hand, how the human sensibilities work, and this is what I like to call comprehensive awareness, which embraces both and doesn't throw away anything. It simply throws away the assumption that you can reduce all of our understanding to one or the other. It requires both. Thank you very much.